Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of our two-dimensional array lesson. We're going to be taking a look at how to code an actual two-dimensional array, and we're also going to be looking at how to access it in a single statement. And we're finally going to finish by looking at how it works with loops, with a for loop specifically. So I'm going to just jump into my Visual Studio program. Okay, and what I'm going to do first is I want to create and initialize with values an array with 5 rows and 3 columns. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to set up my array by first specifying my data type, which is an int, an integer. I'm going to need to use my square braces. Now, if you recall from part 1, we need to place a comma in between the square brackets, because we need to tell the compiler that this is going to be a multi-dimensional array, this particular two-dimensional array. I'm going to then put my array name, you can call it what you want, my assignment operator, the new constructor keyword. I'm going to restate my data type int, set of square brackets. And then in these square brackets, the second set of square brackets, I'm going to indicate rows and columns. So I need to first specify the number of rows in my array. I want a 5-row array, and inside of each row I want 3 columns. So I'm going to put the number 5, comma 3, okay, in the square brackets. So now the compiler knows what type of array, or how to set it up in memory. Okay, and then I'm going to add my data. So I'm going to use a set of curly braces. Now I'm going to use an overarching set of, like an outside set of curly braces. Okay, and inside those curly braces, I'm going to put a set of curly braces that's going to contain my actual data. And I'm going to have a total of 5 sets of these curly braces, separate curly braces with data inside of them. So I'm going to just simply paste to save some time. Now you'll notice that I have my outside set of curly braces, and then inside them I have a whole set of curly braces, 5 of them, and inside the curly braces are data. And this data is separated by commas. Now I'm using integer data, so I don't need to put any quotes around it because it's not a string array. But each column, or each data inside of each row column, is separated by commas. And then those in turn are separated by commas. So here's my first row. It contains a row of 0, 1, and 2. So here's our first column, second column, third column. That's the end of my row. I have a comma here. I start my next row, another set of curly braces, 3, 4, 5, and so on until I have a total of 5 rows. Each of those rows contains 3 pieces of data. Each comma indicates that it's going to be a separate element. Okay, and then finally, of course, I'm going to end it with my outside curly brace and a semicolon. You'll notice that the last row doesn't have a comma. Okay, and that's going to set up, declare, and initialize my two-dimensional array. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to actually see if I want to show you how I'm going to access an individual element in this array. So by doing that, I'm going to use a console write line statement. Just a plain old console write line statement. And I'm going to use the array name. Oops. And then it's followed by square brackets. Now, what the number I want to access is going to be, I want to access the 4th row, the 3rd number in the 4th row, the 3rd column in the 4th row, which would be number 11. So how do I do that? I don't have a linear array. I have an array that's stacked up 5 rows. So you can almost picture these curly braces as being stacked on top of each other. Okay, so I need to first specify the row that I want. And remember, we start counting at 0. So we're going to count 0, 1, 2, 3. So I know that my 4th row is going to have the index number of 3. So I place that in my square brackets, followed by a comma, And then after that, I'm going to need to specify the column I want inside that row. So remember, we're at our fourth row, which would be index position 3, row 3 index-wise. And I want 11. Okay, so let's start counting from 0. 0, 1, 2. So you're talking about the second column inside that row, which would be 2. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this program, and what it should actually display is the number 11. Okay, so you'll notice that in these curly square, I don't know why I keep calling them curly braces, these square brackets, I'm not using one single index. I'm actually using a combination of two indexes, one for the horizontal, one for the vertical. In other words, one's pointing to the row, and the other one is pointing to the column inside that row. So it's row first, then column. So let me test this. Test this out. Okay, so it's come back with 11, which is what I thought it was going to be. So you see that by just changing these numbers around, I can come up with a different number. Okay, let's say I want to access the first number of the second row. Okay, well, then I'm going to change this first number to 1. Remember, 0, 1. And then I'm going to change the second number to the index number of our first element, which would be 0. First column in that row, 1, 0. So I should end up getting back 3. Okay, and I did get back 3. So you see how by altering the numbers, the two indexes, I can easily move anywhere I want to in this multi-level array. Okay, now I want to show you how to use loops. So specifically, I want to output each array's element's value. In other words, I want to go through this entire array, row by row, column by column, and print out the values on my console window. To do that, I'm going to need to use a loop. But not just one loop. I'm going to need to use two separate loops. One loop stacked inside of another loop. So I'm going to use for loops for this. Okay? For this particular one, I'm going to use some for loops. So let's do this. We're going to need to use, as I said, for loops. So let me set up my first loop. Okay? So now I'm going to do a little bit of changing. My outer loop, this is my outer loop, is going to control what row I'm pointing to. It's going to point to each of these rows. So I'm going to change this length to 5. Since I have 5 rows, I want to loop through 5 rows. That's all I need to do. The next thing I'm going to do is set up my inner loop. Now this inner loop goes inside of the outer loop. Okay, and the inner loop is going to is actually going to do the work of writing out the columns to our console window for each row. Just do that, and then I'm going to hit double tab just so I don't have to type all that out. I need to change my counter number, okay, from I to J because I'm in the same code block. So I'm going to get a conflict error if I don't do that. And I'm also going to change the length to 3 since I have 3 columns inside of each row. So the way it's working is when I start up my loop, my for loop, the outer for loop is going to initially be set up with the counter, its counter I starting at 0. It's going to check to see that I is less than 5, and then it's going to go right into the loop and then encounters the second inner loop, which is then going to do its own setting up. It's going to set up its own counter, J to 0. It's going to check to see if J is less than 3, and then it's going to continue. So in my loop, I want to write out the columns. I want to do a console write statement. So I'm going to do a console write. Okay, my 2D array. And I'm going to need my square brackets. Okay, now in my square brackets, I'm going to need to put the index numbers, but I can't hard code the numbers. That doesn't make any sense because the loop is going to be changing. I want those numbers to change every time the loop goes around. So like we do with all of our loops, what we're going to use is the index variable letters instead. So since our outer loop is controlling which row I'm pointing to, I am going to replace any number with I. And then for the columns, I'm going to use J. So those are going to be stand-ins for my index numbers. Just like we did up here, we hard-coded it. We hard-coded it with numbers, which works, But in a loop, since this is going to be looping around, we want to make this change automatic. By using counters, I can do that. Okay, so let's think about it for a second. So again, when the outside loop starts, it's going to set I to 0. I is going to be checked against the outside boundary, okay, which is 5. Okay, we know that it's okay, so then it's going to immediately encounter the inner loop. The inner loop is going to set itself up at j equals 0. Okay, j is going to be checked against 3. Okay, that's fine. So my j counter equals 0 right now. And the outside, that's my inside loop counter. And my outside loop counter, I, is equal to 0 right now. So when I come in, remember the value. I'm going to console write my 2D array. This I is actually going to have a value of 0. J is going to have this value of 0. So what's actually referencing is the first row and the first element of the row. Okay, so we should print out 0. I'll put my output here. I'll put 0 there. Okay, we come back up to remember we're in our inner loop. We're still in our inner loop. We're going to increment the j counter because we haven't finished our loop yet. It's not going to go back up to the top. We're going to increment our j counter to 1. 1 is less than 3. Now remember, I is still 0. Now j is 1. So what we're actually referencing is the first row second occurrence, or the second element, which would be 1. Okay, we come back up to our loop. We increment j to 2. Okay, now I and j is 0 and 2. Now we're going to print out. It's going to point to the last element of the column of that row. Excuse me. So we're going to get this. Okay, so we go up. We increment. We're still in our inner loop. We increment that to 3. Boom. We get out of our loop because 3 is not less than 3. Now we come back up to our outer loop, and now we increment I to 1. Now we're looking at the second row. Okay, we come back in. We reset our inner loop counter back to 0. Now we're looking at 1 0. Okay, and then we're gonna start it over again. Okay, now the one thing we should do though before we get out of this loop, before we go, and I'm talking about when we're done with our inner loop for each row, we want to do one thing. This is important. We want to do a console write line, a blank line, because if we don't, we're going to get everything on one line. We don't want to do that. We want to put a separate line in. When this for loop finishes, it's going to then go to this line. It's going to write a blank line, then it's going to come back up and do then set the for loop, the outer for loop again. Let's just test this, okay? And I hope this is making sense. I'm going to test this. Okay, cool. So you could see, besides the number 3, which was this line, number 12, you'll see, let's get this out of here. You'll see that what happened was in our for loop, our outside for loop, we pointed to our first row. Then the inner loop went to work and printed out all of the columns, the data in the columns. Okay. Then once we got back up, once we got out of that loop, it wrote out a blank line and brought us to here. And then we went back up to our outer loop, changed the counter, went back to our inner loop. We reset the whole loop back to 0. So it started over again and then printed out that row and so on. We just kept going until finally the outer loop, we went past I was equal to 5, and then we got out of the loop. And then I just used this tab character here with a concatenation symbol to put some space in between so it looks more like a matrix. Okay, I hope this has helped. I'm going to put the code for this guided lesson in the comments below. If you have any questions, please let me know. This will be the basis of our next Lab 5.5. Okay, so again, please let me know if you have any questions, and don't forget this is crucial to understand how the indexes are working with our loops. Okay, our outer and our inner loop. Okay, the inner loop is going to be based on the outer loop. Okay, the outer loop gets us to the rows, and the inner loop gets us to the columns.